The small town was calm and quiet in the late afternoon, with the kind of peacefulness that made everything feel ordinary. Streets were lined with modest houses, and children played in yards while the soft hum of distant traffic could be heard in the background. In one of these houses lived a young woman who had always kept to herself. She enjoyed simple routines, spending most of her time at home or walking through the town's small parks. She never sought attention and had a way of blending into the background, unnoticed by most people. But inside her, there was a secret that could astonish anyone who knew. Ever since she was a child, she had a deep connection with music. Her fingers, small and nimble, seemed to have a mind of their own when they touched the piano keys. She learned from a young age, practicing in silence for hours each day, pouring every emotion into the melodies she created. Nobody in the town knew the full extent of her skill. She had won awards and competed internationally, but she never talked about it. Music was her private world, her escape from everything ordinary. One afternoon, an unexpected letter arrived. It was from the organizers of the town's annual charity concert, a well-known event where local talent was showcased to raise money for community projects. The letter was polite but firm, requesting her presence as a performer. They knew she could play, and they were certain that the audience would be amazed if she participated. She hesitated as she read it, her heart tightening. She had never played for a local crowd, only for herself or in professional settings where people understood music deeply. The thought of performing in front of people who might only clap politely and move on made her uneasy. Still, she tried to ignore it. Days passed and more messages arrived. The organizers were persistent, praising her talent and insisting that the town needed to see it. She explained that she didn't perform publicly anymore and preferred to play in private. Each refusal was met with gentle but unwavering insistence. Eventually, she realized that avoiding the concert would be impossible without causing unnecessary tension. With a reluctant sigh, she agreed. Though her mind was filled with anxiety and uncertainty, the weeks leading up to the concert were filled with preparation. Not in the sense of practicing new pieces, she already knew what she wanted to play, but in trying to calm the nerves that seemed to grow heavier each day. She would sit at her piano at home, practicing as always, but now her thoughts were clouded with questions. What if the audience did not appreciate the depth of her music? What if they expected something simple, and she accidentally overwhelmed them? Despite her fears, she reminded herself that she had faced large audiences before and that her music always found its way, no matter who listened. The night before the concert, she barely slept. Her mind raced with memories of past performances in grand halls across the world, where applause was abundant and people genuinely understood the emotions in every note. She wondered if her small-town audience could ever feel the same intensity. Yet amidst her doubt, there was a quiet resolve. She knew she could not back down now. She had to show up, even if only to satisfy the organizers. When the day arrived, the town hall was buzzing with activity. People chatted in small groups, children ran around excitedly, and the organizers hurried to make final adjustments to the stage. She arrived early, quietly observing from a corner. Her eyes fell on the grand piano set in the center of the stage, polished and gleaming under the lights. It was beautiful, but it also felt intimidating. As she walked closer, she could feel her heartbeat quicken. Her hands itched to play, yet the nerves made her hesitate. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath, and tried to push aside the anxiety. Music had always been her voice, and she knew it could speak louder than words ever could. As the audience began to take their seats, the excitement in the room grew. People were chatting, laughing, and looking around at the decorations. Few paid attention to her as she quietly approached the piano. She was just another performer to them, someone the organizers had convinced to play. They had no idea what was about to unfold. She sat down, adjusting the bench slightly, and placed her fingers lightly on the keys. The first touch sent a shiver through her, a reminder of the countless hours she had spent perfecting her skill in silence. The organizers gave her a nod, signaling that it was time to begin. She closed her eyes and let her fingers find their place. The first notes were soft, tentative, but precise. Even in their simplicity, there was a hint of something extraordinary. The audience, initially distracted by small conversations, began to quiet down as the music filled the room. People exchanged curious glances, unsure of what they were hearing. The melodies were familiar, yet carried an intensity they had never experienced. Each note seemed to tell a story, pulling them in slowly. She continued to play, her confidence growing with each piece. The nervousness that had weighed on her lifted as she became absorbed in the music. Her fingers danced across the keys with elegance and power, creating harmonies that seemed to resonate with every listener. Eyes widened, jaws dropped, and even the organizers watched in stunned silence. They had expected a polite, simple performance, something to fill the time. What they got was beyond anything they could have imagined. By the time she reached the middle of her performance, the room was completely silent. The usual rustling of programs and whispered conversations had vanished. The audience was captivated, leaning forward in their seats as if afraid to miss a single note. Some whispered to neighbors, asking if she had studied abroad or if she was a professional pianist. None of them had any idea that this humble young woman, who had walked quietly among them for years, was capable of such brilliance. The music carried on, flowing from her fingertips like water over rocks, effortless, yet powerful. Each piece showcased her mastery, not just technically but emotionally. She played with a depth of feeling that spoke to the heart of every listener, evoking memories, emotions, and a sense of awe that lingered in the room. The audience began to feel the story behind each melody, connecting to something far greater than themselves. By the time the last note faded, the room was still. For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, applause began to ripple through the hall, growing louder and louder until it became a roar of appreciation. People stood up, clapping and cheering, some with tears in their eyes. The organizers looked at each other in disbelief, realizing that they had witnessed something remarkable. They had forced her to perform, expecting a simple show, but what they got was a revelation. As she stood and acknowledged the applause, a quiet smile crossed her face. Relief and satisfaction washed over her. She had been forced to play, but in doing so, she had shared a part of herself that had always remained hidden. In that small town hall, surrounded by ordinary people who had no idea of her global achievements, she had revealed her true self. Her music had spoken louder than any words ever could, leaving an impression that would not fade anytime soon. After the performance, people approached her, eager to know more. They asked how she had learned to play, where she had trained, and why she had kept such talent hidden for so long. She answered modestly, giving only glimpses of her past, careful not to boast. Yet the awe in their eyes and the warmth in their voices made her realize that this experience, forced as it was, had connected her to her community in a way she had never imagined. She had brought joy, wonder, and inspiration to people who might have never known that greatness could exist right in their midst. That night, she returned home. She reflected on the day's events. She realized that sometimes being pushed out of one's comfort zone could lead to extraordinary moments. What had begun as an obligation had turned into an opportunity to touch lives through her music. She sat at her piano once more, playing softly for herself, feeling a newfound sense of purpose. The world outside her small town was vast. But tonight, she had discovered the power of sharing her gift, even when she had not chosen to do so. And deep down, she knew that this was only the beginning of a journey that would take her far beyond anything she had ever imagined. The next morning, the town still buzzed with excitement from the previous night. Everyone seemed to be talking about the young woman who had played the piano. The same quiet person they had seen walking through the streets without attracting much attention. People were amazed. They could not stop repeating how beautiful the music had been, how it had filled the room in a way that made hearts ache and soar at the same time. Many who had been skeptical before admitted they had underestimated her. They had expected a small, polite performance. But what they heard was something unforgettable, something magical. The young woman herself felt a strange mix of emotions. She was relieved that the performance had gone well, but she also felt exposed. For the first time, she had shared a part of herself that had been private for so long. Music had always been her refuge, a place where she could be completely herself without worrying about judgment. Now, however, the world had caught a glimpse of her inner life. She wondered if the attention would ever end, or if people would constantly expect more from her. She tried to focus on her routine, telling herself to enjoy the normalcy of her small town. But she knew deep down that nothing would feel quite ordinary again. As the day went on, she received unexpected visitors. Some were neighbors who wanted to express their admiration. Others were journalists curious about the story behind her talent. She welcomed them politely, answering questions with humility. She explained that she had been playing for many years and that music had always been her passion. She did not exaggerate or boast. Her goal was simply to share a piece of herself through the piano. Despite her modesty, the visitors were clearly impressed. They kept asking if she had performed in big cities or with orchestras, and her quiet nods confirmed that her experience was far greater than anyone had imagined. By midday, videos of her performance had begun circulating online. Clips recorded by audience members captured her hands moving across the piano keys, the fluidity and precision that made it look almost effortless. Comments poured in from people across the country. Some expressed disbelief, saying they could not believe someone so young and humble could play at such a high level. Others were inspired, sharing their own stories of hidden talents and dreams they had put aside. The videos became a small sensation, but she did not allow it to overwhelm her. She remained grounded, focusing on what mattered most to her, the music itself. During this time, the organizers of the charity concert approached her with an offer. They wanted her to play again at another event, one with a larger audience and a chance to raise even more funds for community projects. She hesitated, remembering how reluctant she had been the first time. Yet she could not deny that she felt a quiet thrill at the idea. She had seen how music could touch people, even those who never thought they would be moved. The thought of bringing joy and inspiration to more people stirred something deep inside her as she prepared for her next performance. She returned to the piano with renewed focus. This time, she did not feel forced or anxious. She approached the instrument as if meeting an old friend, letting her fingers flow naturally across the keys. She experimented with melodies, blending classical techniques with her own interpretations. Each piece seemed to have its own personality, expressing emotions that words could never capture. When she played, she felt a sense of freedom, a release from the pressures of expectations in daily life. Word of her talent continued to spread. People from nearby towns began visiting to hear her play, as she received invitations from music teachers, local schools, and even small festivals. She accepted some, always careful to choose venues where she could focus on the music rather than the spectacle. With each performance, she discovered new ways to connect with her audience. She learned to read their reactions, adjusting her pace and dynamics to draw them into the story of each piece. Music became a conversation, a way to communicate without words. She reveled in the connection. One afternoon, a small group of children approached her after a performance in the park. Their eyes were wide with admiration, and they asked questions about how she had learned to play so well. She knelt down, smiling warmly, and explained that practice, patience, and love for the piano were the most important things. She encouraged them to try their own instruments, to find something that made their hearts happy. Seeing their faces light up with excitement reminded her of why she played. It was not about recognition or fame. It was about sharing joy and inspiring others to pursue their passions. Despite all the attention and praise, remained humble. She avoided speaking of competitions she had won or countries she had visited to study music. Instead, she focused on the present moment, on the people in front of her, and the way they reacted to the music. She realized that the true power of her talent lay not in accolades or recognition, but in its ability to touch hearts and awaken emotions. Every note she played carried a part of her soul, and that authenticity resonated with everyone who listened. As the days turned into weeks, she began to notice subtle changes in herself. She felt more confident, not in a boastful way, but in her understanding of her own abilities. She learned to trust her instincts, to play without fear of judgment. She discovered that being forced to perform had, in fact, opened doors she had never considered. Opportunities arose not just from her talent, but from her willingness to step into the spotlight. However reluctantly, people continued to come to her performances. Some out of curiosity, others seeking the emotional experience her music provided. She welcomed them all, sharing her music generously. Each audience left with a sense of wonder, often talking about the performance long after it ended. The young woman realized that she was not just playing notes on a piano. She was creating memories, touching lives, and inspiring dreams. This understanding gave her a new sense of purpose. One evening, after a particularly moving performance, she sat alone at the piano reflecting on her journey. She remembered the first time she had been asked to play, how nervous and reluctant she had been. She smiled at the thought, realizing how far she had come. The experience had taught her that sometimes the moments we resist the most can lead to the most meaningful experiences. Her music, once hidden and private, had become a gift to the world, and she felt a deep sense of fulfillment as she closed her eyes and let her fingers move over the keys. She understood that this was only the beginning. There were countless melodies yet to be discovered, emotions yet to be expressed, and people yet to be touched by her music. She felt a quiet excitement for the future, knowing that her journey had just begun. The world was waiting to hear her, and she was ready to share her gift. One note at a time, as her reputation began to grow, people from beyond the town took notice. Videos of her performances spread on social media, shared by friends and strangers alike. Comments poured in from people all over the country, expressing amazement and disbelief at the skill of a young woman from such a quiet place. Some wrote about being inspired to revisit their own forgotten talents, while others spoke of how deeply the music had touched them. The attention was new and unfamiliar to her. She struggled to process the sudden interest. Despite the growing fame, she remained grounded. She continued to live her life in the small town, walking the familiar streets, greeting neighbors and tending to her daily routines. Her connection to her community gave her a sense of balance. She knew that the recognition was temporary. If it was not paired with authenticity and a true love for her art, she played piano because it was who she was, not because anyone expected her to. Invitations started arriving from music teachers, festival organizers, and local schools. They wanted her to perform, to give master classes, and to share her knowledge with students. Each invitation was tempting, but she carefully considered each one. She didn't want to rush into anything. She wanted her performances to be meaningful, not just a spectacle. She accepted some invitations and declined others, always guided by her desire to connect with people through music rather than to impress them. One day, she received a letter from a prestigious music academy in a distant city. They had heard about her performances and wanted her to perform in a special concert showcasing hidden talents. The opportunity was enormous, and it was tempting to think about the possibilities it could bring. However, she hesitated, feeling nervous about stepping into such a prominent stage. It reminded her of the first time she had been forced to perform. That anxiety had transformed into something beautiful. She wondered if she could feel the same again. After careful thought, she decided to accept. She knew that she wanted to share her music with a larger audience, but she also wanted to remain true to herself. The preparation began slowly, with careful selection of pieces that would showcase her abilities while remaining heartfelt. She wanted every note to carry emotion, every melody to tell a story. As she practiced, she discovered new depths in her music, subtle variations in rhythm and tone that could touch listeners in unexpected ways. The journey to the city was unlike anything she had experienced. The bustling streets, the tall buildings, and the energy of people moving in every direction were overwhelming at first. Yet she felt a quiet excitement. This was a chance to step into a new world, one where her music could reach people who had never heard it before. The piano in the concert hall was massive and impressive, but familiar under her fingers. She could feel the instrument responding to her touch, sound carrying through the room like a living entity. When she performed, the audience was captivated immediately. They had heard rumors of her talent, seen videos, but nothing compared to experiencing her live. Her fingers moved with precision and grace, weaving complex melodies that were full of emotion. Some leaned forward in their seats, eyes wide with wonder. Others closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, feeling each note deep in their hearts. She realized that her music had the power to create a shared experience. connecting people who had never met through emotion and understanding. After the concert, people came forward with questions, compliments, and requests for more performances. She answered modestly, explaining her background and her love for the piano. She spoke about how music had always been a part of her life, how it had given her comfort and joy, and how she hoped it could do the same for others. Her words were sincere, and people felt the authenticity in them. They were not just impressed by her skill, but by her humility and her desire to share something meaningful. The experience in the city changed her in subtle ways. She realized that her music could inspire more than just appreciation, it could awaken dreams, memories, and emotions in ways that words could not. People approached her to tell stories of how her music had reminded them of loved ones, brought back cherished memories, or encouraged them to pursue their own passions. She was humbled by these interactions, understanding that her gift carried responsibility and opportunity. It was no longer just about personal expression. It was about touching lives. Back in her small town, life continued, but now with a new perspective. She continued to walk the streets, play in parks, and visit neighbors. But she also began to think about ways to give back through music. She started small workshops for children, teaching them not just how to play, but how to feel the music, how to express themselves, and how to enjoy the process. She encouraged them to experiment, to make mistakes, and to find their own voice. Seeing their eyes light up with excitement reminded her of her own childhood, the joy she had found in music. The children's enthusiasm was contagious. They asked endless questions, trying to understand how someone could play so beautifully. She answered patiently, sharing techniques and tips, but more importantly, she shared stories about the emotions behind each piece. She emphasized that music was not just about technical skill, but about connecting with oneself and others. This approach resonated deeply. Many of the children began to explore their own creativity with newfound confidence. As her influence grew, she began to receive invitations from even larger venues and organizations. Some of them were international, offering opportunities to perform in other countries and to collaborate with renowned musicians. Each offer required careful consideration. She wanted to ensure that her music remained personal and meaningful, not just a performance for recognition or fame. She knew that the integrity of her art was more important than the size of the stage or the prestige of the event. Despite the growing demands, she found ways to stay grounded. She continued to live simply, maintaining her daily routines and spending time in quiet reflection. Music remained at the center of her life, not the attention it brought. She discovered that the more authentic she remained, the more people were moved by her performances. Audiences responded not just to her skill, but to the honesty and emotion that flowed through every note. One evening, after returning from a performance in a nearby city, she sat quietly at her piano. She reflected on how far she had come from a small, reluctant performer to someone whose music was touching hearts far beyond her town. She remembered the nervousness she had felt when first forced to play, the uncertainty about whether she could meet expectations. That moment of reluctance had led to a journey she could never have imagined. She smiled softly, realizing that sometimes paths we resist lead to the most profound experiences. Her music became more than just a skill. It became a way to communicate, to inspire, and to connect. She understood that talent alone was not enough, was the emotion, authenticity, and dedication behind it that made it extraordinary. Every performance was an opportunity to share a piece of herself, to leave a lasting impression on those who listened. And with each note, she continued to grow, both as a musician and as a person, learning that the true power of her gift lay not in recognition, but in the lives it touched and the emotions it stirred. The months that followed were a whirlwind of experiences she had never imagined. Invitations to perform kept arriving, not just from nearby towns or cities, but from places far beyond the borders she had known. Music academies, festivals, and concert halls wanted her to share her gift, and she realized that the world was slowly opening to her talent. She had spent so many years playing in private, honing her skills, and now there was a demand for her presence. The thought was both thrilling and overwhelming. She approached these opportunities with care, choosing those that felt meaningful. She wanted her music to touch people, not just fill empty seats. Each new performance was carefully prepared, with pieces chosen for their emotional depth and the story they could tell. As she played on larger stages with bigger audiences, she felt the same connection she had felt in her small town hall. Music had a way of breaking down barriers, of reaching hearts regardless of age, background, or language. Traveling to new cities brought challenges she had never faced before. Large venues were intimidating, and the energy of audiences unfamiliar with her style could be nerve-wracking. She would arrive early, spend hours familiarizing herself with the piano, and practice in the quiet of empty halls. Her hands moved over the keys with precision, her mind focused, yet her heart open. When the performance began, the nervousness dissolved. She was lost in the music, and the audience followed her, swept along by the melodies and emotions that poured from her fingers. Reviews and reactions were extraordinary. Critics called her a virtuoso, describing her performances as breathtaking and moving. But she remained humble, knowing that accolades were not the purpose of her music. The real reward was in the moments she saw in the audience, the tearful eyes, the smiles, the quiet awe. Those reactions told her that her music was doing exactly what it was meant to do, connecting with people on a deep and personal level in between performances. She took time to mentor young musicians. She believed that talent should be nurtured and shared. Her approach was gentle and encouraging, focusing on helping students understand the emotion behind the notes, the importance of practice, and the joy of playing for oneself. She emphasized that music was not about perfection, but about expression and connection. Watching the next generation discover their own voices reminded her of her own beginnings and filled her with a quiet satisfaction. She also began to collaborate with other musicians. Pianists, violinists, and vocalists approached her with ideas for joint performances. These collaborations allowed her to explore new musical territories, blending styles and creating something unique. She learned from each musician, appreciating the different perspectives they brought. These experiences enriched her own playing, teaching her to listen more carefully, adapt, and communicate through music in ways she had never considered. Despite the growing attention and travel, she remained deeply connected to her roots. Her small town was still home, and she returned whenever possible to play for local events, charities, and school concerts. The people there remembered the shy, quiet young woman who had been forced to perform that first time, and now they saw the global recognition she had achieved. They welcomed her with warmth and pride, and she cherished these moments, knowing that no matter how far she traveled, her heart belonged there. Every performance, every audience, and every collaboration added layers to her understanding of music. She discovered the subtle ways a melody could evoke memories, how dynamics could create tension and release, and how silence could be as powerful as sound. Her playing became more than just technique. It became storytelling, a way to convey emotion and narrative without words. She felt a profound sense of purpose, knowing that her music could move people, inspire them, and offer solace. Through it all, she learned about herself. She discovered resilience, patience, and the ability to embrace challenges. Being forced to perform initially had pushed her out of her comfort zone, but it had also revealed the depths of her talent and her capacity to touch lives. She realized that true artistry was not just about skill, but about courage, the courage to share a piece of oneself, to be vulnerable, and to let others experience it fully in quieter moments. She reflected on the journey, from the shy, reluctant performer in her small town to a celebrated musician performing on stages far and wide. She saw how unexpected opportunities could shape a life. She understood that every note she played carried meaning, that every performance had the power to inspire, and that her gift was a responsibility she embraced with humility as her global recognition grew. She also recognized the importance of staying true to herself. She resisted the pressures to conform to trends or expectations. She selected pieces that resonated with her personally, that allowed her to express her authentic voice. Audiences noticed this authenticity, responding not just to the technical brilliance, but to the sincerity and emotion behind every performance. It became clear that her success was rooted not in showmanship, but in honesty, dedication, and a deep love for music. The young woman had come a long way from the hesitant performer who had been pushed onto a small stage by insistence and obligation. She had found her voice, shared it with the world, and discovered the power of her music to transform lives. She played not for fame or recognition, but for the connections her music could create, the emotions it could awaken, and the joy it could bring to others. And so, each day she continued her journey, performing, teaching, collaborating, and exploring new musical horizons. She remained grounded, humble, and deeply aware of the gift she had been given. Her music had become a bridge between her inner world and the hearts of countless people, and she embraced that responsibility with grace. The reluctant performer had become a global